are all aware of our conscious actions. If we want to pick up a pen, we simply think about the action and do it. This is known as volition. It is entirely natural and it feels natural. There are other actions that we perform, however, there are unconscious, which is instinctive actions that are performed without volition. The first category of unconscious action is known as excitomotor actions. These are actions such as breathing, swallowing, and maintaining a heartbeat. The second category is known as sensorimotor actions. These actions are reacting to fright or reflex actions. For example, pulling one's hand away from a heat source before the pain has registered. The common factor in this unconscious action is that they are instinctive and involuntary. In 1852, psychologist William B. Carpenter identified a third category of unconscious action, which is the ideomotor action. The ideomotor actions creates ideomotor effect. Ideomotor actions are unconscious, involuntary motor movements that are performed by a person because of prior expectations, suggestions, or preconceptions. The classic example is that of dowsing. Dowsers usually hold their rods out in front of them so that they are parallel. When they come across whatever it is they are trying to detect, usually water, the rods will cross over at that point. A complete novice who is told that water is beneath the ground at a certain point will find that as they cross the point, their dowsing rods will deflect or cross. This is because they know where the point is and they subconsciously move their hands slightly, which crosses the rods. The important point to note is that this is done unconsciously. The person who is crossing the rods does not realize that they are themselves doing it. In fact, it feels as if some external force is acting upon the rods, which makes the experience even more powerful. Planting ideas involves priming the unconscious part of the brain to act and makes it seem like it is an unconscious effort. In this video, we will explore how the ideomotor effect could be used to plant ideas and suggest unconscious action in other people's mind. The first experiment is called the Florida effect. In an experiment that became an instant classic, the psychologist John Bark and his team of researchers asked students at New York University, most aged 18 to 22, to assemble 4-word sentences from a set of 5 words. For one group of students, half the scrambled sentences contained words associated with the elderly, such as Florida, forgetful, bald, gray, or wrinkle. When they had completed that task, the young participant was sent out to do another experiment in an office down the hall. Actually, that short walk was what the experiment was about. The researchers carefully measured the time it took for people to get from one end of the corridor to the other. As Barr had predicted, the young people who had fashioned a sentence from words with an elderly theme walked down the hallway significantly more slowly than the others. This experiment brought the term the Florida effect. The Florida effect involves 2 stages of priming. First, the set of words primes throughout old age, though the word old is never mentioned. Second, this thoughts prime a behavior, walking slowly, which is associated with old age. All this happens without any awareness. When they were questioned afterwards, none of the students reported noticing that the words had a common theme, and they all insisted that nothing they did after the first experiment could have been influenced by the words they had encountered. The idea of old age had not come to their conscious awareness, but their actions had changed nevertheless. This remarkable priming phenomenon, the influencing of an action by the idea, was caused by the ideomotor effect. The second experiment is called the Lady Macbeth effect. The Lady Macbeth effect is a priming effect that could occur when response to a cleaning act is increased after having been induced by a feeling of guilt or shame. The effect is named after the Lady Macbeth character in the Shakespeare's play Macbeth, in which she imagined bloodstains on her hands after committing murder. In one experiment, different groups of participants were asked to recall a good or bad past deed, after which they were asked to fill in the letters of 3 incomplete words. Those who had been asked to recall a bad deed were about 60% more likely to respond with cleansing-related words like wash, shower, and soap, instead of alternatives such as wish, shaker, or stop. Then, the experiment continued as participants were induced to lie to an imaginary person, either on the phone or in email. People who had lied on the phone prefer mouthwash over soap, and those who had lied in email prefer soap to mouthwash. What made this experiment differ from the previous one is the act of cleansing. The cleansing is highly specific to the body parts involved in the scene, and lying involves doing bad things with mouth through a verbal act. Another example of how Ideomotor effect could show that people are prone to unconscious suggestion is through the Ouija board, in which players seem to believe that the board is being moved by some paranormal forces, when in fact it is their unconscious actions that move the board. The main keys to Ideomotor actions are ideas, which will trigger emotion and create impressions. Through impressions, unconscious action will be created. The Ideomotor effect has been known for over 150 years, yet it is still not a widely known phenomenon. It tends to be used rightly as an explanation for dowsing and the Ouija board. Its scope, however, is much wider than that, and it should be more widely known explanation for delusion and psychological manipulation. They could also be seen as classic example of how we can be fooled by our senses and ourselves. Many people believe in things because they have experienced them for themselves, because they trust in the perceived infallibility of their senses. The Ideomotor effect is just one example of why we should use objective scientific testing rather than relying on subjective personal experience to work out what is real and what is not. By being objective, we are less likely to be manipulated by people who know how to work their way into our unconscious mind. Thanks for watching, and if you like our content, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss our future updates. Until then, stay safe and we will see you in the next videos.